don't believe it," muttered Lord Morton, squinting at the miniature. "It's a hoax." "Then watch me," Sarah replied calmly. "I'll paint it right now." Her fate was on the line at the 1808 Bartholomew Fair. It was a moment of truth. Would she be exposed as a fraud or finally recognized for her extraordinary talent? For Sarah Biffin, everything she had worked for was about to be judged by a skeptical crowd and by a nobleman with influence. On the morning of October 25, 1784, in the small village of East Quantock's Head, Somerset, a woman named Sarah Biffin woke with sharp contractions. The village didn't have its own midwife, so her husband, Henry, who worked as a cobbler, jumped on horseback and raced to a neighboring town. The midwife arrived an hour and a half later, and not long after, a child's cries filled the room. "Oh, Lord, what is this?" the midwife whispered. She had seen many births, twins, triplets, stillbirths, but this newborn girl was unlike any she had ever delivered. The child had no fully formed arms or legs. She was alive, breathing, crying, and somehow perfectly herself. What the midwife was witnessing was a rare congenital condition now known as phocomelia, in which limbs are underdeveloped or absent. The mother wept, cradling her baby close. "But she's our child," she whispered. "What can we do but love her?" Henry stood in silence, overwhelmed. There were no answers. But they were faithful people, and they made their decision quickly. They baptized the baby girl with her mother's name, Sarah, and carried on as best they could. They already had 4 other healthy children, and they treated Sarah as one of their own. Of course, word got around. Some neighbors murmured that she was a punishment for the family's sins, though what those sins might have been, no one could say. Others suggested that perhaps the Biffins had been dealt a strange kind of luck. "She'll be worth a fortune at the fairs," they whispered. "They'll rip her from their arms just to get a look." The dark joke passed from mouth to mouth. Sarah grew up surrounded by these whispers, but her spirit was undimmed. She was small, only about 37 inches tall as an adult, and weighed very little. But she had boundless energy, wit, and curiosity. She learned to read. Then she taught herself to write, by holding a pen between her teeth and drawing careful lines on paper. "Can I try again?" she would ask her mother, determined to make the lines straighter each time. In time, her penmanship became neater than many adults. And that wasn't all. She learned to sew, embroider, and do delicate handiwork with her mouth. What she lacked in limbs, she made up for in precision, control, and fierce determination. But society offered her no real future. Her parents quietly discussed the idea of sending her to a convent or asking her siblings to care for her indefinitely. They didn't expect her to marry or lead a fulfilling life. Whether they meant to or not, they made it clear. She was a burden, and they didn't know what to do with her. Everything changed when Sarah was 13. A man named Emmanuel Dukes, a showman who traveled the country in search of curiosities, heard rumors about an unusual child in East Quantock's Head. He came to see for himself and was astonished. "She's the 8th wonder of the world," he whispered. He struck a deal with Sarah's parents. He would take her on tour, feed and clothe her, and in return, she would perform. The family agreed. For Sarah, it was an escape, and perhaps an opportunity. She was introduced to the public as a marvel, a girl born without arms or legs who could write, sew, and paint using only her mouth. Crowds gathered wherever she went. Dukes saw profits. Sarah saw possibility. She taught herself to paint miniatures, portraits and landscapes on thin ivory plates, often smaller than the palm of a hand. She dipped the brush in paint, gripped it between her teeth, and began creating. Her work quickly gained attention for its delicacy, expression, and remarkable detail. Her miniatures sold for 3 guineas apiece, a high price at the time, but Sarah received only £5 a year. The rest went into Duke's pockets. One day, she painted a self-portrait. It was a quiet act of defiance. She stared at herself in the mirror and painted what she saw. Not a spectacle, not a sideshow, but a woman with dignity, pain, and strength. The image spoke volumes and changed the course of her life. Then came the Bartholomew Fair of 1808 in Smithfield, London. Among the crowd was George Douglas, Lord Morton, a nobleman known for his support of the arts. He was skeptical when he saw one of Sarah's works. "No," he said. "She didn't paint that. It's impossible." "You're welcome to watch," Sarah told him. "I have nothing to hide." He accepted. She was brought a clean ivory plate. With calm precision, she took up her brush, dipped it in paint, and began to work. Morton leaned in, watching every movement. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, almost in awe, "It's real. She truly did this." Morton immediately bought out her contract from Dukes and became her patron. He brought her to London, introduced her to the royal family, and enrolled her at the Royal Academy of Arts. It was an unprecedented move. Few women were accepted, and none with Sarah's condition. She flourished. She painted portraits of King George III, George IV, William IV, and the young Queen Victoria. She opened a studio. She taught students. Her name became known in aristocratic circles not as a curiosity, but as a master of her craft. In 1821, she received the Silver Palette from the Royal Society of Arts, a rare and high honor. Morton even took her to Belgium, where she was commissioned by members of the Belgian court. Her calendar was booked for months in advance. Did she think about love? About happiness? Of course she did. As she painted the faces of others, nobles, dignitaries, children, she often wondered what it would be like to have a family of her own. Then she met William Stephen Wright, a bank clerk. He admired her, spoke of her soul, and wooed her gently. Morton, protective and wise, asked him directly, "Are you prepared to be her husband?" "Yes," Wright answered. "I love her. I see who she is, and I can't imagine life without her." Sarah believed him. She pleaded with Morton to allow the marriage. "Please," she said, "no one else will ever see me this way. Let me have this chance." And so, on September 6, 1824, Sarah Biffin became Sarah Wright. But her new husband quickly revealed his true nature. He took control of her finances, giving her a measly allowance of £40 a year. The tenderness vanished. He became cold, demanding. Her creative spark dimmed. In 1827, Lord Morton passed away. Sarah lost not only her patron, but her protector. "You have to work!" Wright would shout as their money dwindled and she failed to paint. Years passed before she picked up a brush again. In 1830, she returned to her art. Eventually, Queen Victoria herself awarded Sarah a pension. With this support, Sarah found the courage to leave her husband and move to Liverpool. There, she began again. She opened a new studio. She painted with renewed passion. Locals admired her and greeted her with respect in the streets. This chapter of her life was one of her most productive and fulfilling. Sarah Biffin died on October 2, 1850. The people of Liverpool paid for her funeral. She was buried with honor, her memory cherished. Today, her paintings remain highly sought after. One of her modest miniatures was sold at auction for £137,000. Her works are preserved in the National Portrait Gallery in London and the Somerset Museum. But more enduring than her art is her story. A story not of pity, but of perseverance. Not of suffering, but of triumph. She lived not in spite of her condition, but because of her vision, her skill, and her unshakable spirit.